All right. Welcome back to the Big Picture with Ian Nash. I'm Ian Nash. We're back with Grant Schnarr, author, spiritual, spiritual leader,
Guy.
guy, dude, uh, influencer. Grant, what's up,
I
man?
hate that title.
No, you're not. You are not an influencer. You're not an.
I don't influence anybody. Yeah, right.
Right. But yeah, man, what's going on?
Hey, lots of good stuff. I mean, we got a lot of good feedback from last week talking about ghosts and paranormal and all that. Very cool. I mean, to get that.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, so yeah, like you were talking about to me just before we started.
Mhm.
A lot of people have reached out to you, so we're kind of continuing the topic of after death communications, visitations, and just like the interaction between human beings and spirits or things that
Right.
seem to be spirits, and kind of the difference between someone who might just be more born with special abilities or
Mhm.
abilities that maybe they've developed over the course of their life versus someone who, goes out and tries to engage in occult practices
Right.
or use these different types of rituals that have, been popularized over the past, couple hundred years actually, of ways of being, giving control of your body to some entity or things like that, and having messages come through where we kind of differentiate between psychics, mediums, um, and channeling, and then just people who have like my grandma passed away,
Right.
and her her spirit said I'm okay, and
Yeah.
I'll see you later. So yeah, so the phrase that you kind of uh, introduced me to is after death communication.
Mhm.
So yeah, we could just start there and whatever sort of, information or anecdotes you might have around that.
Well, as in studying the near-death experience, you come across this. When I first started, it was just called visitations, but now they've coined a phrase that, like NDE, there's ADC, after-death communications. And there's been studies done where there's all these different kinds or ways that people feel like usually a loved one has contacted them from the other world and basically said in some way or another or made them feel, I'm okay. And so it's nothing. Um, there's nothing scary. Well, actually, it can be a little scary. I have one story I'd love to tell you where it was scary. But generally, it's just something really nice, and it can be anything from smelling the scent of your grandmother who's on the other side to a butterfly, flying around you, and you just get this sense that it is connected to someone who passed. Special song comes on that you remember them by. But I think the ones that are really obviously incredible are when, well, first of all, dreams that are very realistic. The person wakes up and goes, that wasn't just a dream. Sort of like what they say about the near death experience. It was more real than real. But then there are those kinds where, grandma will say, appear and say, I'm okay, Johnny, don't worry about me and things like that. That can be a little startling, but it's more common than you might think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's. I mean, I personally um haven't had anything quite too specific, but even just last year, my wife's grandma passed away, and this, in Japan, and we were here, and she felt like, her spirit kind of passed through and kind of let her know that it happened, and kind of just said, yeah, like everything's fine, and then it was after that that then her family contacted her and told her what had happened. So it seems like it seems like these, we're kind of, I think in kind of wider culture, we're kind of told that, oh, that's so rare. Near death experiences are so rare, and it's these fringe people or these experiences of the divine or of a loved one who's passed away or a loved one who knows that you're struggling and wants you to know that they're okay and that the being completely weighed down by grief, like that we don't necessarily have to do that and things like that.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, like it seems like it's much more common than most of us are led to think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wanted to tell you a similar story, but the one that I was saying might have been a little scary to the person. It wasn't that the apparition was scary, it was just the idea that the person had died. Like you were saying, a friend of mine in was stationed in Germany in the army, and his sister came down very quickly with meningitis, spinal meningitis, and she passed away before they could get a hold of him. And again, that's back in the day. You had to use his telephone, and if he was off on duty somewhere, it was going to take some time. And he said and this was before this was way before I read anything about visitations or after death communication. But he said that he was walking down the street and his little sister was standing there, and he was like, "What are you doing here?" And she said, it's okay. I'm going to be all right. And then she disappeared into the crowd. Well, he said that he was very upset. I mean, he called, I mean, like, oh my gosh, what's happened? And he went and called home and found out that she had died. I think in the long run, he felt very comforted by that, but at the time he was kind of shocked. Again, where does that come from? Because he didn't even know, right? Or like you're talking about your wife, I mean, and that kind of thing. Weren't even expecting it. So there's something going on there that is very real and very natural, I think, and it's so comforting to people when things like that happen.
Absolutely. Yeah, it really is. So, and I think what I kind of want to focus on is just this difference between that, right? Just that the appearance of someone who's passed away, or just that reassuring thing, versus people who dive into these like occult practices and rituals, and even like Ouija boards and stuff like that. We talked about it a little bit. And just like I remember, in school, there's a teacher who would talk about how, her warning to all of us was, don't use Ouija boards. And the short version of her story is she started using it, and I think her grandfather's name was Adolf, right? And she thought that the spirit of her ring, well, this is my I'm already. I might be telling, and what I'm talking about, but I'm not going to name her because I haven't gained her information. But
I know where this is going. Anyway, go ahead. Yeah.
Anyways, she thought she was speaking with the spirit of her grandfather Adolf, but eventually she felt that she was talking to the spirit of Adolf Hitler.
Yeah.
And she felt that like this, she would be walking home at night and the spirit would be behind her and stuff like that. And that could be a mix of something that was really happening or something that she was imagining or whatever. But yeah, and you've told me some anecdotes of people who have had very scary experiences around that. So yeah, if you want to share some of that.
I would love to. First of all, it's just interesting. I got a text from someone who had an experience like that, and I thought maybe I would read it to you. He said, "Go ahead." It's a little bit longer than what I would love to read, but I think it's worth it. He just said, great show and all that. When I was like 20, I got deep into occult rituals and used to practice the thelemic rituals that Aleister Crowley wrote about. I remember doing this shadow Kabbalah ritual, and for the next couple of weeks, I was plagued by awful sulfur burps that hurt to come up and stunk up the whole room like overcooked boiled eggs. You would figure I would have understood that I was doing bad stuff, but I was young and dumb and on the road to serious bad times and health. And then he wrote on. This was a spirit I used to have a devotion to. And then he says, Jesus saved me from myself and the evil I was making covenants with. So I guess he became a born again Christian. But that was interesting. Somebody calling up and saying, or not, texting saying, I went through something like this. I wanted to tell you another one that I kind of, I will never forget. There was this young man when I was a pastor in Chicago. His first name was Steve, and he was in his 20s. And he came to us. He found the church. He was reading Swedenborg, very interested in him. I had started this church in a cafe in Chicago, and but he said that he got there through a long journey, and part of that involved the occult. And he told this story where he was young and he was reading these books about how to summon demons. And so I think it was in some basement of some warehouse or something. He's by himself and he made this pentagram and everything. And he said he had this book and he was there to the point where here comes the demon. You're supposed to say, I call upon you. And he said spirit, and it had an N. So he says spirit N, and nothing happened. I call upon you, spirit N. Well, he later realized N meant name, put a name in there, so he wasn't calling on anybody specifically. But he said he just gave up. Oh, well, this doesn't work. And he said he's going out, cleaned up. He's going out the hallway or up the stairs, and he hears this clicking like that. And the way he describes it, he turns, and there's this demon with his arms crossed. I mean, just like what you would expect, smiling at him with these hooves and everything, and terrified him. Obviously, the way he told it was terrifying. Now, it went on, though, which made it for me more believable that he was then plagued by these voices, these very demonic voices who would curse at him, tell him to hurt other people, say all kinds of disgusting things. And he clearly linked that to this demon. And I don't know. I know that he was working on mainly therapy, to get rid of this kind of thing. And again, we've talked about maybe there is some combination between something physical or physiological that's happening to you or mental and something spiritual. But and he started to get better. Now, years ago, I knew him for like 6 or 7 years, and then he went off somewhere else, and we lost touch. But it seemed like he was getting better, very much so. But he said, "This stuff, don't mess with it. Absolutely, it's just bad, and this is what happened to me." That was one of those that I find very sobering.
Yeah. I think, not necessarily within the new church, but just kind of on a broader scale, like people who get interested in this stuff. And I think there are people who come from maybe very like agnostic or atheist background, right? And they have a family member die. And for them, this person is, now they just don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
But they carry around a lot of the pain around their passing, and then they seek out psychics or mediums or channelers to kind of make contact with the spirit and things like that. I would be interested to hear your opinion on that type of thing. Like and also your opinion, but then also maybe what Swedenborg's thoughts would be on it. Of should people really ever be trying to contact spirits to kind of gain some healing or anything like that? Or is it just far too risky, and by weakening the veil, we're kind of, like you said, allowing these evil spirits to affect us in very negative ways?
Great subject. It goes all over the place. Let me start with a piece of it. I think if you're on your own and you think you're like these folks who were just talking, this last one I was talking about, well, both of those guys, if you're on your own and you're trying to do this, I think you're making a big mistake. You don't know what you're getting into. You're not prepared for it. You are going to thin that veil. You're not going to get what you want. I think now people have said, yeah, but there are those people who do this safely. I'm just like, yeah, I agree. I know people who have had a thin veil, who have even talked to people on the other side. And one who worked with me on that home exorcism, she really had some kind of power. She really did. She said it was a curse, and I don't know if a blessing, that it was something that she could use to help other people, but it was also a curse. Sort of like, I see dead people kind of thing. Didn't always want to see what she was seeing or pick up on, like, say, an evil sphere, like you and I talked about last time. You can sometimes kind of feel something somewhere. Well, she, was raw, about that. So it was a blessing and a curse for her, but she used it for good, and often worked. She never really let on absolutely how she was getting information. She would, with this particular home that we were working on, she actually said to me, "Let me go away tonight and do my thing. I'm not going to get into it. and I'll come back and I'll probably be able to tell you more about this entity. And she did. She came back and she told us more, and then she prepared us for battle. I mean, it was so weird. Like put this on and that. Not the Ghostbusters guns or anything, but and it turns out a lot of what she said seemed to be dead on about this thing. So I believe that, and that's different. And when it comes to mediums, going to a medium, I don't know, more for a lot of people, I would put that more in the category when you get on television or something. It's a lot of entertainment. Is there something to this? Well, it sure seems like it when you watch these things, but I don't know. I think we know over history there have been a lot of charlatans and fakes, and then there's other times where people seem to have some kind of gift. So I'm going to leave, like you talk about, I'm not going to say it doesn't happen. I really I believe it does. If you want to get into what Swedenborg said, it's interesting because he says, first of all, just like we were talking about, don't contact spirits. He's, the old Latin translation was you're going to get enthusiastic spirits, but it really is, that's not really the right word for it. You're going to get fanatical spirits that want to get back into this world. And if they have to, they'll get back into this world through you if you let them. But then he goes on to say, pristine times or whatever, back in the most ancient days, or even indigenous people, very innocent, very much connected to nature, actually, as well, have a very thin veil, and that there is it is not dangerous. In fact, it is simply natural to talk to who he would say to talk to spirits and angels. And that is something that we actually have built into us, in the sense of that we are spirits inside our bodies or whatever. We're not aware of that world as long as we're in our bodies, or maybe some are more than others. And maybe there will be a time in the history of the human race when we've evolved enough through love, through loving acts and being loving people, that kind of thing, that the veil will become thin again in some kind of way that is beautiful, in the way of being able to talk with angels and maybe those we love. Don't pursue it like Jesus said, thief goes up into the house some other way. I think that we're not supposed to go up some other way, live a good life, become a spiritual person. Maybe something will happen.
Yeah. I what you were saying there about like indigenous peoples and kind of that state that they were in. It reminds me of, I don't know where I read it or heard it, but I think there's this theory or this account maybe by the priest who was with Christopher Columbus, but it talks about how the first Christopher Columbus and other explorers, they didn't call them Indians because they thought they were close to India. They thought they were at India. They called them like Indios, like in Dios, like people in God, people with God already. They thought that. Yeah. I'll have to explore that a little bit. But yeah, I definitely heard it somewhere that that they were the people like in Dios, like the Europeans came and they encountered these people who just felt like they were so close to God, or just also in this state of innocence and this state of connection with nature and communication with nature, that the Europeans they just all they could say is that these were people in God already. And so yeah, that when you said that brought that up for me.
Yeah, well, it just seems to be a universal thing. Even I mean, with the idea, you get into these folks that have kind of been isolated, or isolated from the Judeo-Christian Western world, the materialistic, and they happen to have this much better or deeper communication to spiritual in general. I mean, whether it's the ancestors. This is true in Africa as well as in America, and it's north or south, having been there. And but I think that it's a very natural thing, that's going on. And I think a lot of ways the West has come in and ruined that, over time, or even said when they got there, it misinterpreted what was going on. Yes, there was ancestor worship, but in the most part, it was simply recognizing and acknowledging ancestors and how important they were, the ones that were on the other side. And let's say there was some communication going on. Well, then they would look up to their ancestors as being these wise people that they could go to for knowledge. But then these short-minded, I don't know, closed-minded people coming in from a Christian background or whatever, saying that's ancestor worship. You can't do that, and misinterpret it in so many ways, and then make dominate the culture and tell them to do away with it.
Yeah,
I certainly, yeah,
yeah. I mean, and even just, I think on like a very basic level, like if you live in these tropical areas where you really don't need to wear clothing, like that was part of it from what I remember. Climate was part of it too. It's like these people who were, naked as the day they were born,
mm-hmm.
with no shame, kind of like, and that kind of ties into the Adam and Eve thing. These people with no shame at all about being naked, and just like, and I like having been being someone who has been naked in nature, it is an incredibly freeing and connected experience,
Mm-hmm.
and just like having that, just like, it's like a degree of like self-acceptance and stuff, and like it really, I think it's a big part of Western culture, of just like we feel this need to cover up and be modest and all these things, and yeah, and I think that's part of it too, of the indigenous part of it, of just like, if you're naked in nature, you're gonna feel more a part of it.
Well, cool. I don't know where, I don't need to know any more about that story, but fascinating. But it is interesting that, and again, as archetypes, Adam and Eve, and being naked and not ashamed is symbolic of their, in a deeper spiritual, their spiritual nakedness, openness, vulnerability, innocence, Swedenborg says actually represents those for Adam and Eve may not have been the first two people on Earth, but they are symbolic of the first people on Earth, who would be the indigenous people. Uh, Again, a lot of cultures teach that those first people were very pure. So there's a lot to that. Um, I hear you.
Yeah. And I think we're talking about like a future day. I remember in school being taught like the different churches, like the most ancient church. And I guess we're in the new church right now. That's right. And then
Yeah.
is there another church after this? Or are we kind of,
Well, it's interesting. Swedenborg talks about, and again, I want to say for our listeners that when he talks about church, he's talking about, if you really look at it, he's talking about community or a way of life that people have been cycling through in this world. And so, even there, he said there will be a new church. I mean, meaning, it wasn't a specific organization. It was a new time, a new way of connecting with God. So when he said that, he felt that Christianity had played out its role as being the primary conduit for God in this world, and that it had to be reborn, so to speak. And so he believed that that there would be this new Christianity that was much more pure, more less dogmatic, more open to things like we're talking about, more, and maybe living, walking the talk, that there would be a new time, a new era, a new age. And I think it's interesting now because that was back in the 18th century. Now people even call today post-Christian era, which is interesting. But at the same time, you have, right, you remember the age of Aquarius, or like there's this new time, this new age. I think for him, he believed, I mean, because it said like it says in the book of Revelation, that this would go on for ages upon ages, things like that. That he believed that this was really we're all going to come into this completion of humanity and connection with God, forever and ever. Now, may I say something to get me fired from my own faith? I mean, I do believe that every religion believes that that's it, right? I mean, so. Judaism believed that was it. And Jesus, a Jew, came out and said, you have heard it said, this and that said about eye for eye, tooth for tooth. We talked about this our first podcast. but I say unto you, and he changed it all of a sudden. He's like, that's not true. This is true. So I think, and then Swedenborg comes along and sort of does the same thing, saying, yeah, you talk about God being loving. How about the idea that God just is love? I mean, and that judgment is an appearance, or we judge ourselves or put ourselves in places where evil brings its own punishment. Kind of like that, that was true, but now this is true. So he goes, now this is true. Well, I'm not naive enough to think, is it possible that there's going to be something else coming along and saying, now I want to tell you that was true, but this is true, and just give us another layer, right? That's my opinion. So I just think seems to make sense if you look at how revelations have developed over the years, and I think understanding of God. It's interesting. It's almost like it breaks both waves. I raise on a wave. I mean, like as at the longer the human race goes on, there does seem to be this wave that goes off into greater understanding of the divine and connection and all that. And then this other wave that's just going off the rails, with whatever, violence, materialism,
Yeah.
immorality, as you want to define it. And I think that's in the book of Revelation, when they talk about the separation of the sheep and the goats. I mean, that we're just seeing that the more we can know, I think the more we can abuse what we know. And the more free we are spiritually, the more we can either use that for good or abuse it as well. So I think that's where we are. Now, you ask these profound questions, you get these long answers.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. Yeah, and I think, it's like what you're talking about is kind of what we're doing. It's like we live in this time where, if you go back to the Middle Ages, like if we had this conversation in a public forum, we would both be killed. We would have been, we would have been burned at the stake.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that we have this degree of freedom of speech and freedom of thought and expression and stuff, and that we can kind of, like I think the word is kind of like, syncretism or something, or syncretic for faiths or things, or just how you,
with it. Yeah.
yeah, it's just like you
That
bring
thing, that word, yeah.
yeah, that word that word of just like bringing different things together. And it's like, yeah, it's I think that's kind of what we're doing. Is like we're all creating our own faith, like in the world today. I think we all kind of pick and choose of okay, this works for me, this kind of quite doesn't work for me. And I think that's kind of the future of organized religion is, and it all kind of already exists right now, but that like you said, becoming less and less dogmatic, and still having doctrines, and still having maybe leaders or whoever, but that we respect people's respect people's ability to look at things their own way and explore their own thought processes, and say, look, this is what works for me to believe in, and here's what worked for me based on my life experience, and then using that. It's a cool time, and
it's a different time for that. In my book, You Can Believe, I talk about that. I'm helping people to build up their own faith, and of course, I use as a basis the teachings of the New Church and Emanuel Swedenborg, because it's like, okay, God's a God of love. We're here because He loves us and wants us to be loving. I mean, it just makes sense to me. But I tell them, build your own faith. It's very important for you to decide what works best for you. Now, I do say, and you would agree with me, there's a limit on that. Again, the wave breaks both ways. I mean, I laugh when I tell my students this. We actually use this book to help them, whether they're Catholic, Protestant, New Church, to get an idea of what they want to believe. But is that, well, if you find that you're choosing things to believe that no other spiritual discipline or religion or anything is teaching, you might want to ask yourself if it's valid. Kind of like, well, I believe that I should, gain all the wealth of the world and put everybody under subjugation. That's my religion. I don't think so. That this whole idea, we're free now. And it's interesting because Swedenborg goes back and talks about a judgment on Christianity. It gets way into this stuff about the second coming is a new era. not necessarily Christ coming in person. But he said in his time, even what this new change, he said, there's still going to be politics, which is interesting. Yeah. There's still going to be wars. There's still going to be differences of opinion about religion. But he said the one thing that will be different for now on, and this was started in the Age of Enlightenment, which is his time, was that there will be a freedom, and get this, from the church. And he didn't mean freedom from goodness or anything like that, but a freedom from the oppression of dogmatic leaders who were in it for their own gain. And we see that it's playing out. I mean, at least here, again, in Western culture, it is playing out, and that's a good thing, as you say, as well. I can't think of anything better than spiritual freedom, right? To choose.
Yeah. And there's like, all actions have consequences, right? You look with people who go and do the occult practices, and then they felt like they were being followed or felt like some evil spirit was having an influence on them. I think, I think, in my life, I've found that like some people can, they'll have a parent or a teacher or a principal or whoever, authorities in their life say, don't touch the hot stove, right? Don't do that. Don't do X, Y, Z. And some people will say, yeah, that's cool. I trust your judgment, or I trust the system, the system of beliefs that would make sense, that you've taught me, that now I'm going to do that. Some people just don't, and I'm someone like, I just don't, I have to find out for myself. And like, yeah, I've dealt with plenty of consequences in my life, right? But as I've watched more, I'm like, yeah, okay, now I can kind of be like, oh yeah, like maybe I don't need to find that out for myself, right? But
it's funny you mentioned that, because when I was 2 years old, I climbed up on the counter and stepped on the stove. So it was one of the stories my mom always said. Yeah, that's where it all started.
for sure, man, and that's just that's just how some people are. But yeah, I think that's. But yeah, I think even that is kind of like it's like a spiritual practice in and of itself.
Yeah.
Like we all, we like, yeah, life has consequences, and actions, actions have spiritual consequences, and it's kind of like, to me, I look at it as like it takes all types. It's like, yeah, if somebody's gonna say like, killing people is my religion, like, yeah, there's gonna be consequences of that. Like you're probably, like, yeah, it's like, obviously, hopefully nobody thinks that. Right. But,
Well, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they hopefully spend their rest of their life,
Yeah. But it is interesting, because you do have religions that get to the point, or people who misinterpret their own religion to the point of, it's okay for me to go and kill people that are not of my religion. That's happened throughout the beginning of history. But again, that's an abuse. So I think the thing is, I mean, with all of this stuff, it's really, mainly, live a spiritual life. Search for things that work for you, that honor God, the universe, one another, honor yourself, be open to growth. And I think the veil will thin for you in a good way, being more connected to heaven, or whatever you want to call it. And it will come to you in an appropriate way, meaning one with everything. I mean, being synchronous, or whatever you were trying to bring about before. But that's where it will happen. And the rest is just adventure. Right? It's just adventure to hear and know about these things. I mean, I would not say go and become a Ghostbuster. That was something I'd rather have not done. That and a few other things, I had to do it. But I'm still scared when I think back at those things. So I know we're running out of time, but I wanted to come back and say there's a lot of good, and basically just walk the talk as best as you see it. And I think your life will become spiritual. I think spiritual can mean more than simply just, which is the good of being a good person and having your spirit reign over things and all that, but also being more aware of spiritual, heavenly things.
Yeah. And you're talking about kind of how, like the divine will reveal itself to you in an appropriate way. I mean, even just
Yeah.
yesterday I was out at Valley of Fire State Park, which is a really beautiful park out here.
Mhm.
And yeah, man, it's just when you allow yourself to have that peace in nature. I mean, that's to me like that's the greatest way in which God, the divine, the universe exposes itself to us is through nature. And that's like to me the greatest joy is just getting out of the whatever you want to call the machine or
The
whatever it
rat
is.
race, whatever, right?
Yeah, the rat race, the
The
machine,
machine.
the thing that we're all that a lot of us feel caught up in, the matrix or whatever, and just connecting with nature. And that's like you said, just and I think it's that's kind of like the message of all of this is like you said, just do your best to be a good person, be a spiritual person, care about other people, try to help other people, and you learn how to love yourself, learn how to love other people, and the divine will reveal itself to you.
And I couldn't agree more. I love. There's nothing better than getting out into nature and resetting. In fact, there was something on the news today. Finally, the psychologists are figuring it out. They did a study over so many years and said getting out of nature at least once a year for 3 days can help you reset and refocus, and you live longer and all that. I think anybody who's been out there knows that. But it's so important, and I affirm that get on out there. I just spent the weekend running a seminar out in nature, and so that was a lot of fun. We weren't naked or anything, but it was fun.
Nice. Nice, cool. Yeah, man. It's where we belong. I mean, it's our home. Like that's the like
Yeah,
me. Like we can build these houses and these roads and all this stuff. But that's where that's our home. That's where we came from. Is out
yeah,
there in nature. So
yeah.
yeah, man.
It's
I love it. I love it. Great one today. This was a
I
lot of
know,
fun. And yeah, man. Let's keep going.
absolutely. It was
All
a
right.
gas.
Love it. All right. See ya.